things about communication within this network is if you're a well-resourced organisation, you've got lots of people, the chances are, or you're like us, Christine, me, Emily, chances are you're in the right places, knowing about the right things. If you're a volunteer-led group that has run entirely by volunteers and you need to connect, communication is really difficult and it can be inequitable. So one of the aspirations we had several years ago is to make sure people know what's going on. And originally it was around health and social care, but over the last few years, as you probably see, the work of the community partnership has gone into other areas of work. Rob will talk about community safety later. But I said to Christine at the last meeting, it'd be really useful just to give a bit of an update to some of the other things that have emerged. Because it's not just around, actually, not a lot of it is around social care specifically, it's around community updates. And underneath the partnership, it's probably the wrong term, because actually community is the most important part of it. There are a lot of networks that are ongoing, and it's not just HVOS logo there, it's very much a partnership approach. And I just briefly we wanted to do an update in two parts. The second part is about the state of the sector research, which many of us were involved in, which Emily's going to do. But if I could get the technology to work, I wanted to give an update on 3 or 4 things before we did that. And one of the things that has emerged, and there are partners in this room that are part of this, one of the things that has emerged is a community network around welcoming our Ukrainian guests to this county. It's pretty remarkable actually, because I know Alex is here and there are other partners, but this network is now over 20 partners strong. It's made up of the council, but it's made up of other public sector bodies and health, and there are over 20 organisations on that partnership. It's a monthly network that meets, and they are doing all sorts of work around supporting our guests. So CLD and others are doing work around mental health, but there's a lot of work going on around housing. The Kindle Centre here is doing work around ESOL. The HFA, new partners are joining this network, and it's very much a collaborative that is in the spirit of what we hoped we would achieve, but it's work that is going on. And that network meets, as I say, here every first Tuesday of the month, and it is doing some excellent work. There are now link workers employed across the county, as well as large organisations. There are some local support networks in each of the market towns, and there is also Herefordshire Help for Ukraine group. So it's very much a collaborative. We have officers from Herefordshire Council, Talk Community at that network, and it has led to further development work. And there is an integration fund that organisations who've received funding can apply to. And the first round of that work is sort of completed at the end of this year. And there is a round 2 being administered by Herefordshire Council, and officers attend that meeting. And this forum has become quite focused for this work. So any applicant that wants to apply to provide support to our Ukrainian guests, they have to go to that network. And as part of the offer that they are given, they come along. And they're also developing other projects, and I think it's right to say that DLUC, the Communities and Local Government, there is a sort of national programme, and that network is being used as a forum to develop a national bid, which has now gone in. So, some other updates. One of the key things that I'm sure Emily may well touch on is funding is a massive consideration for most, if not all, organisations in Herefordshire. And one of the things that we've done fairly recently, which we promoted at the last meeting, was Meet the Funder event. And the purpose of the Meet the Funder event was to not only highlight possible funding sources, but to bring together some key funders in the county to speak about their work. I think we had 102 people come along, which highlights the importance of funding to the sector. It's one of the many things that we've tried to do under the Community Partnership umbrella. So there is also a funding tool which Herefordshire Council funded and Talk Community has supported, so organisations can register on that portal and look at funding, which not only is important now, but is going to be moving forward. But this is just an example of the types of things that we talked about at the Meet the Funder event. So we had 3 speakers. They were very prominent local speakers, and I think it was immensely helpful for the sector to build capacity around fundraising. So not only could they make contact with the National Lottery, who spoke, and Eveson Trust, and also the Community Foundation, but we provided some resources. And I think probably what we should also do, if it's okay, Christine, is the H-Voice newsletter is where all this information is. I must make sure that everyone gets a link to that, because it may well be that not everyone in the room is getting this information. But if you look at the types of things that we were able to produce, Claire from the Eveson Trust talked about funding in detail, and she gave some really good context to this very prominent funder. There'll be a number of us in the room that receive funding. I see Mike down, I'm sure Echo receives funding from Eveson Trust. It's got an endowment of nearly 100 million, gives out 2 million to Herefordshire. And it's just an example of the types of things we were able to do at that event in terms of supporting the sector. And one of the other things that emerged alongside this is one of our first ever meetings of this community partnership. We talked about the need to coordinate funding between funders, and when Amy, Christine and I started talking about this, we felt it would be really useful at that time to try and bring together funders into a conversation. So one of the other things we've done in the last month is Emily and I coordinated a Herefordshire funders meeting, which was a forum just to see about funders of Herefordshire good causes, to get them together. And I think, again, under the strategic partnership work, our aspirations for that initiative was to get these funders in the room to talk a little bit more about Herefordshire, and to see whether we could perhaps work together in a slightly different way. We didn't quite know how it would end up, and indeed whether many would come along, but it was absolutely fantastic because we had, I think, 15 funders. So they included some of the ones that I've just mentioned, but they also included some other regional and national funders. So we held the teams online, but as well as Hereford City Council, Bournemouth Trust, and some very small ones, including people here that are representatives of those, people like the local Rotary, Lions, Hereford Society for the Aiding the Industrious. We also had some large funders there. So the regional manager for the National Lottery Community Fund came along, the Arts Council were there, and also some other prominent trusts that were trying to join in with supporting Herefordshire. And it's probably worth it. There was one there called the Turner Trust, which I don't know if anyone in the room has heard of them, but they're based in the West Midlands but have an area of benefit in Herefordshire. And they said, what a great forum. We're not aware of other areas doing this type of thing, but when you're outside the county, it was really valuable for them to come and join the discussion. So we hope, by introducing that, they were very quick to say that they wanted another meeting on a quarterly basis. So we were able to introduce some ideas about how that might work. Perhaps there's some joint initiatives that they could support us with. And we did take the opportunity to share with them the State of the Sector report, which again, other areas hadn't done, so they thought we were quite at the forefront of that, and they also, we gave them information on things like in the research team, the council research team, and also the community paradigm. So we gave them the paper that was considered the community partnership. So we've got some quite, not high hopes, but we feel that that could be a very useful forum for our sector. And we just wanted to highlight that as a key thing that we've done since the initiation of the community partnership. The third thing, just to also mention, which is something that we've discussed here. I think just over a year ago, there was some initial disappointment when HBOS closed No Wrong Door, which was a service that we provided through a building and a single point of support for children and young people. However, the research that we did into No Wrong Door by some consultants suggested we needed a wider representative network for children and young people and providers. So over the last year, and I think quite a few partners in this room have been, we've initiated a youth provision forum, and I don't know if it's I just wanted to say that this youth provision forum, and again there's a number of providers in the room that have been part of this. It's met 3 times. There are currently 74 organisations who work with children and young people who've come along. I think it's an example of a specialist network where people have a particular interest as part of the community partnership, where they've come along and talked about what needs to follow for children and young people, which I'm sure most of us will agree is a pretty pertinent issue in the county. And that network, which is independently chaired by Sarah DeRowan, tends to meet here, but some of the work that it's now started to do is to look at how youth work in the county could develop. So it's got sort of an aspiration for some form of a loosely worded youth strategy. But as an example, the types of work that they've done is there was a national programme around funding for the Youth Investment Fund. Partners discussed possible ideas for that, capital projects. And a big aspect of the work has been the emergence of a number of youth groups in very local areas. And I know Talk Community Development Officers are supporting these in their local areas. And there are some that are setting up in Kington, Bromyard, much more smaller areas like Staunton on Wye and also Wigmore. But the idea here was that Close House, under the umbrella of some training, they're delivering some professional youth work for volunteers in the sector, because that they identified with the group that they were probably the leading organisation to provide accredited youth work. So they, as part of this network, are now delivering level 1, level 2 and level 3 accredited youth work to organisations that need that support. In terms of representation, what's been quite interesting is it's still developing, this network, but people are interested in it, and lots of people will be aware of the improvement plan around children's services. The actual chair of this group, and that has been considered by the network, has become involved in being a rep on the Children and Young People's Partnership Board. So I think that's again an example of perhaps a specialist network that's providing peer support and to a network, then starting to inform some of the policy changes. So I just wanted to include that as something that has clearly been beneficial, has been practical. And an example, we were just talking about youth provision in Ross, and at the first meeting of this network, one of the youth leaders from Ross stood up and said, I had no idea that there were 40, 50 other people in this county providing youth support. It's fantastic. I can see I can link in. And at that meeting, I think I'm right in saying, where's Alex? I think Strong Young Minds and CLD said, we want to get some provision going in Ross, and I think some of the workers have been down to support that youth club.
Well, Bromyard is the one that we've developed with the Hope Centre in Bromyard.
Yeah.
And we've joined in with the basement in Ross.
Yeah.
That's part of our sort of lottery funding to do that outreach work, so it's been brilliant.
So, and that's the type of the spirit and the partnership work that I think we all want to see. So, that's the boarding bit from me. I've got another bit. Oh yeah, I should have said we've got our AGM on the 6th of December. I must give that a plug. So you're all very welcome to that. Do you want me to do this bit? Yeah. So you probably, some of you will be aware, not everyone, but there is now a review of the Talk Community Programme in Herefordshire, that Herefordshire Council's undertaking. A number of us have been invited to start shaping this, and there is a steering group that's looking at this, and there is an event planned on the middle of December, which will be held here. So, having done that bit, I'd like to hand over to Emily, who's going to talk about the next stage of the State of the Sector report, phase 2.
So I was just going to talk very briefly about the State of the Sector survey. So back in 2021, we partnered with HBOS to commission some research to give us a really good picture of the landscape of the voluntary sector. There were lots of sort of key objectives around it, like looking at the size and the breadth and the diversity, looking at how it compares with regional counties nationally, what the social and economic contribution is, how it supports each other, and what some of those key issues are. We have brought that survey a number of times to the community partnerships. I'm not going to go in detail about what the findings of that were, but obviously if anybody hasn't seen it, we can send the link round so that you can see State of the Sector round 1. So how the research was done, we worked with a company called Impact Consultancy, and they created a database of all they could find on the voluntary and community sector in Herefordshire, so using things like Companies House, the Charity Commission, registered societies, the Council Contracts Register, to get as much information as they could about what was out there. And then there was an online survey that was sent out far and wide across the voluntary community sector to try and get people's feedback into what they know. We had 281 survey responses, which is about 12% of what the estimated sector is. And then following on from that, there were interviews with stakeholders, with local infrastructure organisations, and then there were some focus groups that were held, 5 of which were thematic and 4 were primary care network based. And then off the back of that, there were some recommendations, and there were workshops held at the community partnership, and there was an action plan that was put forward as well. When we commissioned it originally, there was always going to be a follow-up survey so that we'd have that comparative data. So where we're at now is we're getting ready to launch stage 2. So what we very much wanted to do is make sure we had sector involvement right from the beginning. So Will did a workshop, I think it was this summer, wasn't it, around the state of the sector at the community partnership, and asked for some volunteers that would be willing to be part of a steering group to really help us shape what round 2 looked like and make sure we had real ownership from the sector right at the beginning. Really keen to try and get an increased response this time around. We're aiming for at least 20%. We're particularly keen to get to some of those harder to identify groups, so people that might not be registered, those local, more informal groups. We're hoping, I mean obviously Talk Community has grown quite a bit since we did the first survey in 2021, but those relationships we've got with lots of the smaller groups will help get their voice into it. But I think that's why we want everybody's help and everybody's support to fill it in, to share it, to make sure we try and get as much input as we can. So our steering group has been looking right from the very beginning, so we've been having some meetings, Will and I and the voluntary sector representatives that have been there to design that survey. We're at the point now we've just about got the draft questions ready, so the group will be involved in looking at that and making sure we're happy to go, and then supporting with the promotion of the survey. There'll also be a part of looking at what the results look like, what the content is, and how we then display that and share that report. So what we've been doing is looking back at the first survey, what went well, what do we want to improve, how useful were the findings, was the language okay, was it easy to follow, and then looking what we want in section 2, are there questions that aren't useful or are no longer relevant, are there questions people didn't understand, we could phrase differently to get the best out of the information we get, and is there anything missing? So I think really importantly the landscape's changed really significantly since 2021, so looking at things like the cost of living and the impact that that's had, so making sure we include some questions on that. But the kind of MB at the bottom there is it's a comparable study. It was commissioned as a comparable study, so we can't kind of go in with a blank sheet of paper and start again. It's about how can we make the best of it to make sure we can still get really good comparative data out of that. So just roughly in terms of what some of the timescales are, so people know which to work to, we should have those final questions agreed by the end of November, and that will then be launched in January and circulated for 8 weeks, so we'll just try and share that as widely as we can. It's really critical that we get as much uptake and as much information as we can, because it makes the information much more powerful. Survey will close at the 28th of February, and then there'll be really, the impact consultancy will undertake some really detailed analysis of that compared to 2021. There'll be follow-up then with the infrastructure, organisation interviews and some more focus groups, so we'll obviously be putting a call out for people to be part of those as well. I put May for the community partnership workshop, I think about March, but obviously to agree with Christy, we'd like to bring that back when we've got that information and do some more follow-up workshops around that. And then we should get that draft report completed, ready to our steering group to assess it, finalise it, approve it, which will then go to Herefordshire Council just for the final sign-off, and then that will be published and shared in June 2024. That's it. Any questions?